Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today we'll be discussing the strength and the resilience of Manchester's Jewish community in the face of rising Jew hatred. And in this programme today I'm joined by my good friend Nigel Tobias. He is the Executive Director of the British Israel Chamber of Commerce. Nigel, great to see you back on the Middle East Report, and so pleased you could be here today.
Well, shalom, Simon, and thank you very much for having me back.
No, it's a pleasure, and of course spent 3 years up in Manchester, so I do have an affinity with the city of Manchester, but it was a long time since you were last on, so it was back in June of 2023, and it's almost like the world has changed since then, clearly post October the 7th, but for my sake and for the sake of our viewers, just share with us something about your Jewish upbringing in Manchester and your love of Israel and also Zionism.
I was brought up in a very strong Jewish faith. We knew what was right and wrong, and my parents were wonderful people, married for 70 years. My mum passed away recently, and she taught us the difference between right and wrong. And growing up in an environment whereby my parents gave us what we needed and the stuff that we wanted, we had to sort for ourselves. So very strong background, and I was aware of Israel and went to Israel for the first time from when I was 8.
And just share with us how going to Israel, being around kind of loving parents and instilling those kind of not only Jewish values into you, but also a love for the nation of Israel and an understanding and the importance of Zionism, the one and only true Jewish state, which is a biblical concept, which is the right for the Jewish people to live in the ancient covenant homeland, which is the land of Israel.
I think I got it really when I was probably 17, and my parents sent me literally on my own as a very shy teenager to Kibbutz, and I thought maybe I was going for a few days, and I was there for 3 months. And I worked a hard kibbutz life and met lots of people that I'd never met before. And it was a social endeavour, and it really struck me. I went back to kibbutz the following year for another 3 months. I'm an ex-kibbutznik. I get what Israel is about. I get the heartbeat, and it means everything to me. And walking on a kibbutz, I can close my eyes, and I'm back to being a teenager.
Wonderful. So can you share with us what kibbutz that was?
I was on Resh Afim, which was in the north, and I was also on Bet Hayamek. One was close to the Lebanese border, and the other was close to the Jordanian border.
Oh, very good. So I did a Hebrew University of Jerusalem program when I was at the University of Manchester, and that was with Kibbutz Shafet, which is in the Carmel, very close to Megiddo Junction. And all-pan course, learning Hebrew one day, working in the Mashnakim, the factory in the other, surrounded by American Jewry and Jewish friends. Kind of best time of my life.
Best time I ever had, picking olives, clearing fields, just absolutely fabulous time. I loved it.
Nigel, share with us how, as a leading businessman in Manchester, and how you've developed those business acumen and being able to translate that to your current role, which is the Executive Director of the British Israel Chamber of Commerce, and how building strong trade links between Britain and Israel is essential for both our nations.
I worked from age 14 in a greengrocer's. After school, I went to work in the family business, and we started to import product from Israel. So we would import canned juices, orange juice, grapefruit juice, things like that. And again, because of that, I used to travel to Israel quite often on buying trips. It was always important to me to do business with Israel, and to basically, it was like a soft advocacy to show, if you will, a predominantly non-Jewish Manchester customer base what Jewish products were like, products from Israel. And that's how I went into business. And many, many years later, because I'd been in business for so long, for so many years, as was then the Executive Director of the British Israel Chamber of Commerce, asked me if I would take over his role when he retired. And we'd got to know each other because I was bringing speakers over from Israel under my own steam and asking them to speak at the British Israel Chamber of Commerce. I have some great links with the trade attaché at the Israeli Embassy in London, and also work with the trade departments in the UK. And it's all about the business opportunities for UK companies to export to Israel, and also for Israeli companies to export back into the UK. 1 in 6 of the prescription drugs in the UK are made by an Israeli company, and the people that wish to boycott goods, I don't think realise that a lot of the medicine that they're probably taking comes from Israel. And that's, what I'm about.
Absolutely, and I think if we gave a whole list of all the products and services that Israel produce, they would be in a pretty bad state. They certainly wouldn't be able to use their phone, wouldn't be able to use their laptop. Certainly if they had health problems, wouldn't be able to go to the hospital. So I think they need to think very carefully before they decide to actually call about a boycott, divestments and sanctions against Israel because of the repercussions. But show us how, for example, Britain needs Israeli technical knowledge, particularly Israel's advancement in AI technology, startup nation, Israel's advancement in terms of the information technology that Israel's just excelling at, and how this is so needed in this country, particularly in the 21st century.
Well, the world is changing, as you quite rightly say. In the 21st century, we are moving more to an AI-based economy, and Israel is literally a world leader. Many of the companies that come out of Herzliya and the surrounding areas are intelligence-based companies. Israel is very good at cybersecurity, agri-tech, and all sorts of things, irrigation, clean water. And many of those innovations can be shared with the UK, which traditionally is seen as an ally.
Absolutely. And Nigel, do you want to share something about the history of the Jewish community in Manchester that goes back 250 years, according to the Jewish Representative Council of Greater Manchester, and share with us that historic connection between the city of Manchester and its Jewish community?
Well, I think, many Jews that escaped from various pogroms came into Salford Port and made a home in Manchester. It's probably the second largest Jewish community outside of London. Leeds might argue, but I think it is Manchester still. And if you go back to the time of Chaim Weizmann, who studied at Manchester University and very famously had many patents in relation to chemicals, it might not be known that Chaim Weizmann was very, very famous for industrial fermentation, was recognised by the British government as contributing so much to the Allies winning the Second World War.
First World War, sorry.
Was it? Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah.
The First World War.
That's right.
There you go. But Chaim Weizmann formed a very good relationship in and around Manchester, and he was close friends with Israel Seif and Simon Marks, who were of course from Marks and Spencer. C.P. Scott was an editor at the then Manchester Guardian, which became the Manchester Evening News, and also he worked quite closely with Arthur Balfour, who at the time was the MP for Manchester East and became Prime Minister. So I think Manchester has a very important role in the recreation of Israel in and about 1948. Not the creation, but the recreation.
Absolutely. And just share what it's like to have, the first president of the modern state of Israel. Obviously, we're talking about Chaim Weizmann here, but he attended the University of Manchester, and I feel very proud because I attended the same university as well. I didn't study chemistry; I studied modern Middle Eastern history, which enabled me to do this program today. But share with us how Chaim Weizmann is actually viewed from the Jewish community in Manchester, because he's essentially one of your own.
We're very proud of Chaim Weizmann. We're very proud of the fact that he was fundamentally important in getting Arthur Balfour and the Balfour Declaration. And the present state of Israel is everything to do, I think, with Chaim Weizmann and the courage and the bravery and the heart that he showed and the commitment to the recreation of the state of Israel. So Manchester is proud of Chaim Weizmann.
Excellent. And talking about the Chaim Weizmann, sadly, we had... I don't know what the best way to describe them is, absolute morons who advocating for the Palestinian cause broke into the University of Manchester's chemistry department and stole the bust of Chaim Weizmann and then destroyed it. Has there been any kind of development about replacing the bust of Chaim Weizmann back at the University of Manchester with that horrendous and disgraceful behaviour?
There's been no development that I am aware of. I suspect that Manchester University will not want to consider something like that in the current environment, which I think is a great shame. Chaim Weizmann certainly was Jewish and certainly has a lot to do with Zionism, but as I say, and as you quite rightly pointed out, Chaim Weizmann was highly regarded by the UK government and not just by Jews. He did a lot for the UK. So I think it's a great shame that somebody from Manchester, from the UK, cannot have a bust replaced in this current environment. I think that's a great shame.
Absolutely. And talking about Chaim Weizmann, I think he needs to be credited for the fact that he actually saved the British war effort. So he produced the acetone that was needed in British artillery that we were running out because the Germans had more. He found a way of producing this en masse, which helped to turn the war effort around in Britain's favour. So we got him to thank really for a huge contribution helping Britain and the Allies beat Imperial Germany in the First World War. But now moving on to the horrific events of October the 7th, Nigel, because we have to look at now this new world in the prism of October the 7th, because everything changed on that absolutely horrific and evil day. We're talking about the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history, where over 1,200 Israelis and foreign nationals were murdered, most of those brutally by Hamas. About between 5,000 and 7,000 Hamas terrorists broke into Israel that day from the Gaza Strip. Rapes, mutilations, destructions of the kibbutzim nearby, taking 250 hostages back into that hellhole that is Gaza, and then maiming between 6,000 and 7,000 people as well. The sheer magnitude was horrific. When did you first become aware of what's happening? And what are your thoughts on October the 7th?
I first became aware on October the 7th. I was actually maybe 4 or 5 days into a charity walk that I was doing with 2 very good non-Jewish friends of mine. One of my friends that I've known for 40 odd years, his wife passed away from cancer, and we decided we would raise money for a particular cancer specialist at the Christie Hospital, so all Manchester based. And we were walking the Camino de Santiago.
Beautiful.
Yes, it was an absolutely amazing trip, and we were literally 4 or 5 days in, and I heard from a number of sources on that particular day, and it was very difficult for me for that day and the following days. I have family in Israel. Kibbutzim is part of my teenage years, and I very strongly considered going home and over to Israel because I felt I could do more there. But I think there was a realisation, and in conversation with my friends, that actually for me to stop that trip and to withdraw from raising all the monies that we were raising for a Manchester hospital, and a very important one, the terrorists would have won another small battle. And I continued through having to take phone calls and Zoom conference calls literally every other day. It was a very difficult time for me.
And just share with us the impact that this has had on your community in Manchester, particularly the rising hatred that we literally saw on the day of October the 7th, but then in the aftermath of it, particularly with Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon.
Simon, quite simply, what happened on October the 7th, I genuinely never thought would happen in my lifetime, never. 60 odd years of age, and it seemed to me that we were back to where we were 70 odd years ago and more. I think, as news came out, and you realise fairly recently that there seemed to be some awareness prior to the 7th of October, even within the UK, in that the Palestinian demonstrators had sought permission to have a march 7 days before October the 7th. And to see the marchers on the streets calling their hatred and with their banners when literally Israel hadn't yet done anything, it just seemed to me that we had lost our moral compass. I think there's a difference between freedom of speech and hate speech. And I think we crossed that threshold and we have not yet drawn back from that threshold. It's very, very difficult. Manchester perhaps is slightly more protected because we have a very, very strong chief constable. A gentleman by the name of Stephen Watson, who I have had the privilege to meet. And I think some of the hatred and the banners and the aggression that you see in London, he's been very firm on. But it's still difficult to see these marches week in, week out, effectively calling for the dismantling of the Jewish state, which is a genocide by any other term.
Absolutely. And just share with us how the Jewish community has responded to this hatred by pulling together and organising, as you did back in January of this year, a big demonstration against Jew hatred.
Well, we have a vigil that Northwest Friends of Israel run every single weekend outside Marks and Spencer's when as many Jews as want can turn up with the banners of the hostages. So we are not afraid literally to show the pictures of the hostages and to call for the hostages to be released, and that is literally every single weekend. And as I say, Northwest Friends of Israel take responsibility for that. And when there are these what I call pro-Hamas, they're not pro-Palestinian, they're pro-Hamas marches, the Jewish community is quite good at seeking to show the other side.
Excellent. So let's have a look at this excellent video that is produced courtesy of the Jewish Representative Council of Greater Manchester. And this is the rally that they organised in the centre of Manchester against the rise of Jew hatred impacting on the Jewish community there in that great city that is Manchester.
Racism is a poison. If it's left unchallenged, it spreads and it contaminates everything that it touches.
We stand against anti-Semitism and we stand against all forms of hatred.
This is a country that values tolerance and freedom, where hatred and division are rejected as the poison that they are.
We must learn from history. Our Jewish community is strong, resilient and proud.
So our message is clear: be resolute, remain proud, and together we will prevail.
And at this most difficult time, we will remain by your side. We will mourn and grieve with you, and we will defend Israel's right to self-defense, and we will stand against anti-Semitism.
Bring home the hostages. Bring them home. Bring them home.
We will never, ever be silenced when we stand up and say no to hate.
And to all of you today who are not part of the Jewish faith, thank you so much for your support. Thank you for joining us. Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people lives and will always live.
And it's so important that Christians attend rallies organised by the Jewish community, and this one, Manchester, and come together against the rise of Jew hatred in this country and say enough is enough. Share with us, I mean, there is a big difference, isn't there, between the Jewish community here in North London, and that in Manchester, that you know, there's more fight in your community in Manchester, a bit more grit. So where does that come from, or is it just part of being a Mancunian?
Well, I think it's difficult for me to comment on London, and I would not wish to
very diplomatic
disrespect London. What I would say, I can speak for Manchester, and we do have a bit of a grit. We've been in Manchester for many hundreds of years, Jews. There's a strong Jewish community spirit, and to be fair, we are used to standing up for ourselves. So I think that's where it comes from.
Absolutely, because I think it's very important then as well not to run away from these issues, but to confront them directly as well, which are very, very important, because it sends a message to the rest of the Jewish community that, look, we can use Manchester as an example of how we've got to say enough is enough.
The Jewish community needs to put its head above the parapet. And it's very, very difficult, but I don't think you can run away from your fears. I think you have to face them head on. And I know that there are a lot of people, there is a lot of advice about not wearing certain pin badges and not wearing a yarmulke and so on and so forth. And I think that's the wrong way to go. It's easy for me to say, but I think that's the wrong way to go, because again, we are giving in to these little microaggressions where we cannot be Jewish in the country in which we were born. I am a proud British-born Jew. Why should I not be able to wear a pin badge that says release the hostages? It's not a political statement.
Absolutely.
Why should I not be able to wear a British Israel pin badge, which I am wearing today, despite the lady on the tube that had the Free Palestine badge? I just think it's important that we live in the UK, we were born in the UK, we are British Jews, and I think Britain needs to do more to protect its Jews than it is doing at the moment.
Yeah. On to British foreign policy, particularly under this Labour government and our Foreign Secretary David Lammy. Share with us how this government is in clear contrast to the previous Conservative government when it comes to Israel, because they seem to be caving in a lot more to the Islamist demands. The fact that this government has agreed with the International Criminal Court to convict Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, of alleged war crimes. Constantly we hear David Lammy talking about how Israel's in breach of international law when it comes to Gaza by not giving aid to the residents of Gaza, when everyone knows, it's blatantly obvious that Hamas are actually stealing the actual aid and there's so much evidence of it. And yet we see condemnation of Israel. He does not speak up for the hostages. And again, it's Israel's the problem when Israel's facing a genocidal terrorist organisation like Hamas that committed the worst atrocities against the Jewish people since the Nazis over 80 years ago.
Politics is about power. And I think this Labour government are looking to keep power. And to keep power, you need votes. There are more non-Jewish votes than there are Jewish votes. And I think this particular administration has, for reasons that I think are immoral, are taking a view that their next administration, if they last the 5 years, needs the votes, needs non-Jewish votes more than Jewish votes, being very politically correct and expedient in making that point. I think the UK government are taking decisions that they don't need to take, and they are taking decisions that are incorrect. In relation to the, the International Court of Justice, quite simply, the court is there, and it says so itself on its opening page. It is there as the court of last resort, and it is the court to complement, but not to replace, a national judicial system. Quite clearly, Israel is a democracy in a non-democratic region. It has a fully functioning judicial system, so much so that an Israeli president was imprisoned by 3 judges, one of whom was an Arab Israeli. So Israel does not need to have its court replaced, maybe to be complemented. For the British government to say that they have full confidence and respect in the court, how can you respect a court that actually goes against its fundamental principles to prosecute the only democracy in the Middle East? And again, with what David Lammy says about Israel is breaching international law, there's a huge difference between allegations and proof. And I think, again, in the UK, we're all about you are innocent until proven guilty. And for David Lammy to come out and state something which hasn't gone before an international court, because if it went before an international court, it could not be proven. I think that the Labour administration and David Lammy are saying things that don't even need to be said, and I think that's the worrying thing. Israel is being treated to a different set of levels than any other country. And in many respects, that is the definition of anti-Semitism.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's have a look now at David Lammy and our Minister of Defence in Israel last August, that was 2024, talking about British foreign policy objectives in bringing the conflict between Israel and Hamas to an end.
We're in the Middle East at a time of real tension. We're here with 2 clear messages. We need an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, agreed by both sides, and to avert an all-out conflict between Israel and Hezbollah.
The loss of innocent lives caught up in this fighting is unbearable. The suffering of the Palestinians is extreme, and Israeli hostages have been held now for over 300 days.
And last weekend, a tragedy in the Golan Heights. Young people playing football, their lives cut short by the horrific attack by Hezbollah. Tensions are high. The risks are acute.
In this, our first month, the government is leading a renewed push for de-escalation and diplomacy.
We are on our first joint visit as Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary. In Qatar, a close partner for security and growth, we met with the leadership who've played an invaluable mediating role in the conflict in Gaza.
How are you? Very good to see you.
Very good to see you. We're very honest. It's a lot to be here.
We further strengthened our close defence and security ties. Visiting UK forces based here are supporting regional stability.
and in Lebanon, we met leaders to discuss de-escalation and the need to step back from conflict and step up dialogue and diplomacy.
We urge all sides to show restraint and work to find resolution. Together, we'll push for peace and security.
And that was courtesy of the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office. It's so easy, I think, for Britain to take this position, knowing that Britain is not surrounded by hostile nations that want her destruction. And that's for having cordial relationships with the Qataris. I know the Qataris are very much involved in negotiations to bring the hostages home and bring about a ceasefire and end the war in Gaza. But the Qataris are not to be trusted because this is the epicenter of the Muslim Brotherhood. And who are Hamas? They are the Palestinian representatives of the Muslim Brotherhood. So share with us how there's a lack of deep understanding about the true nature of regimes like the Qataris when it comes to the Middle East. And because they welcome British diplomats like our Foreign Secretary David Lammy and the Defence Minister saying we can do business with them, the reality is we have to be wary of them. Is that not right?
I think that is right. But what I would take somewhat of an issue with you is that I think the UK is perfectly well aware of these regimes and perhaps is looking in a different direction, which is about trade and not about ethics. So I think they're well aware that the Qataris host Al Jazeera, that the Qataris have given many, many tens of millions of pounds to Hamas, that the Qataris home Hamas in hotels, and quite possibly if Qatari wanted to exert pressure on Hamas, they could do so quite instantly. So I'm not so sure that the Qataris deserve as much credit as they are getting. I think they are part of the problem.
Absolutely. But it's also interesting. I remember a good friend of mine who does a Bible prophecy update each week called John Haller in the States. Now, he showed a clip with the US negotiator envoy Wycliffe with representatives of the Qataris, and they're having a discussion. And what was really interesting is that saying without the presence of the US military base in Qatar, then Qatar would be at the mercy of either the Saudis or the Iranians, and so therefore it owes its protection to the West. So if negotiations get very difficult with Hamas, surely the one thing the Americans can say to the Qataris is we're pulling our US Army base out of Qatar and we'll leave you and we'll relocate to the United Arab Emirates. Therefore, you will be defenseless against the Saudis and defenseless against the Iranians. So the Americans do have huge leverage over the Qataris. How important is it that that leverage is then applied to Hamas in order to bring the hostages home?
Well, I think the new American administration is showing a slightly different face to the Qataris and is exerting pressure that up to now has not been exerted. So I think there is a subtle change. In relation to Hamas, I don't think there's any amount of pressure that can be put on a religious terrorist group because they believe that they are doing the work of their God. And therefore, you know, Qatar, America, Israel, nobody seems to have had the impact upon Hamas. And it's the same with Hezbollah. I think where the pressure really needs to be exerted is upon Iran, which funds, literally trains and sends arms to these groups to cause problems to the West. And to my mind, that's where America should and could do more and isn't at the moment. So that puzzles me a little bit.
And Nigel, share with us the story. You were at a speaking engagement where David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, was the guest speaker, and in the room was Mandy, the mother of the British hostage, Emily Damari. Share with us your thoughts on what he said and particularly the disregard for the hostages.
I was invited to the Labour Friends of Israel lunch, which is an annual lunch, and I went along with some of my committee from the British Israel Chamber of Commerce. David Lammy was there, Mandy Damari, the mum of Emily, was there, and David Lammy, you know, was clearly enjoying the photo opportunity with, you know, Emily Damari, mum Mandy. And it was difficult because whilst we were within the room, we knew that he had posted on X, Twitter, or whatever it used to be, that Israel needed to do more to get aid into Gaza at the same time as he did not mention the hostages, the mother of whom he was in the room with. And it just seemed to be completely disrespectful and insensitive to the time and the moment. So, you know, he had an opportunity to do the right thing and he chose to do the wrong thing. He had an opportunity not to do what he decided to do, which was to refer to more aid going into Gaza via Israel, where Hamas immediately take it and then sell it. What he could have done was to call for the release of the hostages unconditionally.
Absolutely.
At that moment, at that time, with the person that he was with, he chose a different route.
Which is, a damning indictment on him and also on the Labour government. What are your thoughts really on the silence that we're seeing over the death of the Bibas family? Because I think when we look back at the horrors of October the 7th, that was shocking enough. And having visited those kibbutzes that have been destroyed, it was like a mini Holocaust took place on October the 7th. Images in my mind I will never forget, but I'm pleased I saw them because it gives me a real understanding of what happened. But I think we entered into a new level of barbarity in regards to Hamas, and a new level of evil with what happened to the Bibas family. So we know that the father Yardin was kidnapped by Hamas, his wife Shiri was kidnapped by Hamas, and these two beautiful, one baby Kafir Bibas, who was 9 months old at the time, and then his older brother Ariel, who were all taken by Hamas on October the 7th. We've seen that footage of their beautiful ginger red hair being taken by terrorists into Gaza, and then knowing that both Kafir and also Ariel were strangled to death by their captors, and then their bodies were mutilated to make it look like this was an Israeli airstrike. And their mother came back in coffins, and of course the father Yardin didn't know. He was expecting them to be alive when he was released, but then instead they came back in coffins. Now that marked an incredible low in terms of what Hamas did. Absolutely horrific. But share with us the silence that's come out of that, because this should have created worldwide condemnation and indignation from our leaders, from our society, from our media, and yet there was very little response.
I think we're entering a very difficult time for the Jewish faith, for Jews, because had this family have been non-Jewish of any other faith, then I think there would be complete and utter outrage, and the world would share that outrage. And I am genuinely at a loss for words, and I did shed tears when we finally knew what had happened, although I think many of us suspected that they had been dead for quite some time. You know, we talk about it being a new low and a new low and a new low, but it's just that the fact that you think that there must be members of Hamas sitting in a room working out how to actually exert the worst psychological pressure on the Jewish population, whether they be in Israel or outside of Israel, by staging this macabre theatre where there are little coffins and they have the wrong child in the wrong coffin, and the coffins have got a padlock on them so that the Israelis have got to check that they haven't got grenades inside them, and the fact that the father thought that his wife and his children were still alive. It's literally, people are sitting in committees within Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, actually coming up with, you know, ideas as to how to further torture Jewish people and Israeli people. And there is absolute silence, perhaps not from America now, this new administration, but there has been absolute silence. You know, I noticed that the other day that, you know, it was International Women's Day, and a lot of Jewish groups had been excluded from International Women's Day. And even if you look at Finland, not Finland, Norway, you know, women's groups on International Women's Day were tearing down posters of Shiri Bibas and the family. And I just don't get it. These are innocent human lives.
Absolutely.
Who takes a toddler? Who does that? To what gain? To what benefit? Who takes a toddler with a 4-year-old brother, the 4-year-old being the protector of the toddler? Who does that? And there is silence. There is literally silence. And the posters are still being pulled down in the UK and in America and in Europe, and it seems to be acceptable. How is it acceptable? This is not a world that I want to live in. It's not a world that I recognise. It really isn't, Simon.
And that's why all of us have a duty to speak up, particularly for the hostages as well. So
these are human lives, putting whether or not they were Jewish, there were non-Jewish hostages that were killed, there were non-Jewish hostages that were taken, there were hostages taken from 20 or 30 different countries. Where is the absolute condemnation? And not this equivocation about let's have a ceasefire on both sides. Pick a side and pick the right side.
Absolutely.
And we're not doing it. As a world, we're not doing it.
Yep. Well, we're speaking up on this programme, and I know our Christian friends are speaking up on this issue, and we refuse to be silent. Let's have see this excellent report by our friends at CBN, and this is return of one of the Israeli hostages who's had the courage to go to the UN and share his experience of being held captive by Hamas and held in those terror tunnels and horrific conditions, almost starvation conditions, while Hamas terrorists ate in front of him. Take a look.
My name is Eli Sharabi. I'm 53 years old. I've come back from hell. I've returned to tell my story.
Eli Sharabi, freed after 491 days in captivity, addressed the UN Security Council on Thursday.
I cannot begin to describe the agony. It was hell. I was fed a piece of pita a day, maybe a sip of tea. Hunger consumed everything. They beat me. They broke my ribs. I didn't care. I just wanted a piece of bread.
He also testified Hamas stole the humanitarian aid sent into Gaza.
I saw Hamas terrorists carrying boxes with the UN and UNRWA emblems on them into the tunnel. Dozens and dozens of boxes, paid by your government. They would eat many meals a day from the UN aid in front of us, and we never received any of it. When you speak of humanitarian aid, remember this. Hamas eats like kings, while hostages starve.
Sharabi, who dreamed of rebuilding his life with his wife and 2 daughters, learned that Hamas murdered them on October 7th. Israeli UN Ambassador Danny Danon chastised the UN for ignoring Hamas's crimes against the captives.
For 530 days, you have erased the hostages. You have spoken about Gaza without mentioning the crimes of Hamas. You have debated humanitarian assistance without acknowledging the humanitarian crimes Hamas is deliberately inflicting on the hostages. You have had the audacity to talk about a ceasefire without demanding that those held in Hamas's terror tunnels be freed.
On the ground in Gaza, the IDF expanded its military operation. As the Houthis fired another ballistic missile towards Israel Thursday, the U.S. continues its air campaign to stop the Iranian-backed group from terrorizing Israel and the region. Meanwhile, in an unprecedented move, Israel's cabinet voted unanimously to fire the head of the country's domestic intelligence agency. Ronen Bar is the head of the Shin Bet, the equivalent of America's FBI. Netanyahu accused Bar of failing to warn the government in time about October 7th. As Iranians celebrated the Persian New Year of Nowruz, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke directly to the Iranian people.
May this be a year of servat, prosperity. Prosperity when you, the people of Iran, can finally enjoy Iran's rich natural resources, those resources that have been so long denied to you by an oppressive regime.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
We have to really salute the courage of Eli Sharabi there. Not only was he held in the most horrific conditions by Hamas, but he also had the courage to go to the UN and share his testimony of what he went through. So we need to pray for him and his family, particularly the recovery and the remaining Israeli hostages, that they all come home to their loved ones and this war ends. I have to kind of talk about this one. That He was so brave, Eli Sharabi, in actually then testifying to the UN of what he's been through and now that he's a free man. But it's almost like the world doesn't actually care until it happens to them. And of course, this is one of the biggest lessons from history when it comes to Jew hatred, that really what starts with the Jewish people never finishes with the Jewish people. And sooner or later, this evil and terror will come after the rest of us, particularly in our kind of Western democracy. So therefore, it's vital that we show love and support to our Jewish friends and also to the nation of Israel, because you guys are literally on the front line.
It's been said, and it's true many, many years ago within fanatical Islam, that they would come for the Saturday people first, which is the Jews, but in the same sentence, it's the Sunday people next, and that is the Christian faith. And I think it needs to be realised that it is, the Jews are the canary in the coal mine, but the Jews at the moment are being left by the world to their own devices yet again. And we really, as humanity, need to stand up for what's right and wrong. And that's where I'm at. Eli Sharabi spoke very eloquently, but it was irrelevant, because the people that he was talking to weren't even listening. They were there. He had the opportunity to speak. They've still done nothing. It doesn't seem to make a difference. And that is my worry. But
they know, though. That's the difference. So they have to wrestle with their conscience. They knew before. If they've got a conscience, but they will then know, and you can't ignore the testimonies of someone so powerful as Eli Sharabi. And I wish also that our Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, would meet with Eli Sharabi, or even watch that excellent CBN News report to know what the actual hostages went through and show a bit of empathy and a bit of support for the hostages.
Well, what I would like to say is, very recently we had a speaker over to the British Israel Chamber of Commerce, Professor Ruth Halprin-Kadari, and she works on behalf of the Dina Project, which actually is to get justice for the women of October the 7th. And I'm afraid, like you, I have seen one of the videos at the Israeli embassy. I was in a room full of journalists and we were all silent, but there were at least 20 women that were found naked, and I don't wish to be too difficult, but they were found naked in a position where it was clear that they were raped. Professor Ruth Halprin-Kadari prepared a report, a very well-researched report, and even then the UN, and particularly the women's rights groups on the UN, didn't want to know anything about it. And I think this is where we're at. It seems just to be irrelevant, and it isn't irrelevant, and it isn't about Jews, it's about humanity.
Absolutely.
Is this what we're going to accept?
Yep, let's hope not. Let's hope our governments and also other representatives of the UN wake up to this one, because the crimes committed against women on October the 7th, particularly the party goers at the Nova Music Festival, was beyond horrific. And I've seen that video as well at the Israeli embassy, and it's just beyond horrific. But talking about Israel now kind of rebuilding, share with us the massive rebuilding project that needs to be done in Israel, knowing that literally Israel's had to evacuate in the region of 180,000 people from that southern corridor next to the Gaza Strip after October the 7th, but also to protect the Jewish communities in the north, and how now finally some of the members of the north have finally been able to go back home, now knowing that Israel's pretty much defeated Hezbollah in southern Lebanon.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's a lot of rebuilding, and it's not just rebuilding bricks and mortar, it's rebuilding people and minds. I've been down to the south, I've been down to Kfar Azar, and I've walked the kibbutz. For me, personally, that was horrendous. I'm an ex-kibbutznik, and I remember walking kibbutzes barefoot, completely innocent, and I could close my eyes and I saw the outlines of the children that had been lined up outside the kibbutzim and shot, and I saw the homes that they had lived in, which had been burnt and blown up, and the animals, the cows, and the sheds that had been set alight with the animals inside them, and all the dogs that. There is a massive rebuilding project in the south and in the north to put back together a fully functioning country, not just in terms of the commercial side of it, but in terms of the psychological harm that's been caused. In British Israel Chamber of Commerce, we are working quite hard to try and get companies involved in projects working alongside rebuilding farms and rebuilding villages. And I think, you know, when you consider that UK-Israel bilateral trade was at 6.2 billion prior to October the 7th and is now at just over 5 billion, then the trade between the UK and Israel is down 16%. And if that is mirrored, as it will be, throughout many countries, Israel really does need not just commercial support, but psychological support to do the right thing and to rebuild, yet again, the nation state of the Jews, the only nation state of the Jews being Israel. Both commercially and, more important, psychologically, we need support. The Jewish state needs support and the Jewish people need support.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at this rebuilding project that's going on one of Israel's most beautiful cities, known as Kiryat Shmona, which is right on the border between Israel and Lebanon.
The last time our CBN News crew visited Kiryat Shmona in Israel's north, it was a virtual ghost town. And rocket attacks from Hezbollah were an everyday reality. Fine line between brave and stupid. Here we go again. Here we go again.
Get down, get down.
Now, with 2 months of relative peace, more than 60,000 Israelis displaced from their homes are able to return. Life, though, is far from normal as businesses struggle to reopen with only a fraction of residents back home.
We had to evacuate from Bet Hillel. We couldn't stay here. The army asked us to leave Bet Hillel because they're afraid from the bombs.
Hope is budding along with spring, although there are still concerns things may never be the same.
In the first week, I couldn't stop crying all the time. Until the hostages come home, our joy will not complete.
This farm outside Kiryat Shmona, just a few miles from the Lebanese border, is known for these beautiful oranges and the pecans that they grow here. But right now, they're having a hard time finding anybody to come and help them harvest these things. These trees are full of fruit right now, but the foreign-born workers that usually come from Thailand and elsewhere to help them, many of those guys have already moved on to other jobs. And so they are hoping that they can get people to come back and help them get their fruit to market. Now the family's working to rebuild and welcome guests again.
We cleaned everything and start to plant everything, renew everything, and now people start to come back.
For those who have returned, hope remains their region can be rebuilt and return to normal.
To see people come here is amazing. To come back, you know, to see everything come to life again, it's amazing. Sometimes I just stare and speechless of what's happening here.
I'm at the extreme northern border of Israel, just north of the town of Metula, which has been a ghost town for the last 15 months. But now people are starting to come back because if you see that fence right there, that's the border. Just the other side of that is a village inside Lebanon where Hezbollah was firing rockets on a daily basis in here. But that village is nothing but rubble now. And for that reason, the people feel safer coming back home.
While the war, we were open. Meanwhile, all the Kiryat Shmona was evacuated. We are basically was the one business that working. We give serve to the police, the military, the soldiers.
This shawarma shop in the center of town was the only restaurant to stay open for the entire war.
Maybe 30% of Kiryat Shmona community has come back because the evacuation has been longer. So some people has stayed in the hotels, and I hope everyone will come back soon.
Even those who have realize the war is not over.
I cannot tell you the feeling. Now I'm talking with you and I'm starting to cry because I think about all the people that they cannot come back, and about the families and the babies that murdered there. And I love Israel very, very much. I don't want to leave Israel.
From northern Israel, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
And thanks to CBN for that excellent news report. And we also pray that may the residents be able to return to northern Israel and not live under the shadow of Hezbollah and be able to live their lives free of fear and free of terror. Nigel, just share with us, as a businessman, the economic impact of October the 7th and Israel's war against Hamas and against Hezbollah, because we know that Israel called up 380,000 reservists. They've had to then leave their businesses, leave their jobs behind to come out and actually fight. And this has had a detrimental impact on Israel's GDP.
Well, it has had a detrimental impact on Israel's GDP, but I think the country is very, very resilient. And I think the people of Israel realise that, you know, they face an existential threat. So everybody has gone out and volunteered to do whatever it is that they can do. And you have people that, you know, have been retired from the army that have gone back into the army or have gone to do whatever they can do. The economy is without a doubt in some difficulty. AI continues to thrive, but if you look at the farming and the agriculture, there is a lot of rebuilding to do. And I think, you know, where possible, we have a responsibility to encourage more trade to be done with Israel. Sadly, in the UK, it's going in the wrong direction. But I think, as I say, the people have come out and the youth of Israel have come out and shown how proud they are to be Israelis. So I think that I am quietly confident for the future. I think and I hope that the worst is over, but I think we continue to help and show support where we can, Simon.
Absolutely. And Nigel, for any British businessmen or women watching this programme today and are very touched by the programme, share with us the role that they can play in helping to rebuild the nation of Israel after the horrors of October the 7th, and also encounter that blessing that's mentioned in Genesis chapter 12, 1-2, that the Lord says to Abraham, I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you. So we know that this is the plan of God to bless Israel and the Jewish people. So share with us how they can play a major role in helping to rebuild Israel post-October the 7th.
They can play a major role by doing the simplest of things. At this moment in time, the big gimmick is for the pro-Palestinian people to go into independent grocery shops and supermarkets and sticker all the Israeli products, whether they be avocados, whether they be grapefruits, whether they be lemons, whether they be hummus, with Free Palestine stickers. And I think that, you know, your community, the Christian community, can do a lot to help by buying Israeli products, because that's what's needed at the moment. Because where you rebuild the commerce and you provide jobs and you recreate the industries and you support those industries, that's a great thing to do. And it's a small thing to do, is to buy Israeli produce wherever you can.
Absolutely. And as the Executive Director of the British Israel Chamber of Commerce, what can be done in terms of our nation's businesses and industry to reinvest in Israel at this time, to counter the BDS, to counter the boycotters, and to realise that Britain benefits from greater trade and business ties with Israel?
The British Israel Chamber of Commerce represents a broad range of companies, not all of which are Jewish, and we seek wherever possible to make introductions both ways, from Israel into the UK, from the UK into Israel. We work with the Israeli Embassy, we work with the British Trade Representation Society. So what I would suggest is, if you know, some of the community have got businesses and they would like to be more involved, then I suggest that they look into the BICC. We are currently rebuilding our website, which is not terribly convenient, but you know, if they reach out to you and you want to put them in touch with me, wherever possible, there are opportunities to do business in Israel, which will be jointly beneficial for the businesses doing you know, business exporting to Israel or importing. I think it's a collaboration that can work, and I would be very, very pleased to guide and encourage anybody that wants to do that, if you want to put them in touch with me.
Fabulous, because it's so important. It's so important for both our nations to have that dialogue, that trade, that investment between British industry, Israeli industry, and both our nations benefit. And of course, it also strengthens our nations. We don't have the most pro-Israel government in power right now, unlike the previous Conservative government was a lot more sympathetic and a lot stronger towards Israel. But we have to work with what we got. But show us the role that the Christian community can play, particularly those Christians who live in the northeast, in those great cities of Manchester and Liverpool, how they can show solidarity with those Jewish communities in both Liverpool and Manchester at the current time.
Simon, what I would say is that there are vigils being held outside of London literally every weekend. In Leeds, in Newcastle, in Manchester, there are vigils for the hostages. And I would say that if the Christian community want to show support, they should go over to the people at those vigils and show support, introduce themselves. I've said it before, you know, give us a hug, give us a cuddle, because at the moment we are desperately in need of knowing who our friends are. But there are these vigils, people can go up, they can ask for information, they can ask questions, and I think that's the way to do it at the moment. Outside of London, just show support. Do not let the pro-Hamas marchers, do not let them win, do not let them take over these cities. These are UK cities, they don't belong to pro-Palestinians, in my humble, and I have got nothing against Palestinians, but this is about anti-Semitism, the banners, the chanting. It's about free Palestine. Free Palestine from what? Free Palestine from the Jews. It's about, you know, from the river to the sea. Which river? It's the Jordanian Sea. Which sea? It's the Mediterranean. It's about freeing Israel from Jews, and I don't think that, you know, we should stand for that. So give us your support wherever you can. Just
no, absolutely, and kind of the sheer hypocrisy of it all as well. The fact that recently we saw horrific events in Syria with the Alawites there being murdered by this repressive new Islamist regime there, and factions that are associated with this new Islamist regime, where over 1,000 were just murdered in cold blood, and yet the world is silent. But Nigel, I just want to thank you so much for being my guest on the Middle East Report this week. You've done a great job. I think you've represented the Jewish community in Manchester very, very well, and they can be very, very proud that you're one of their leaders. And thank you for being on the programme today.
Simon, thank you very much for having me.
Absolute pleasure. And I want to thank you for watching this programme today. I think it's so important that we support Jewish communities, especially outside of London. And if you are in Manchester, you're in Liverpool, I think this is a wonderful opportunity to show your love and your solidarity to those Jewish communities that are being affected by this unprecedented rise in Jew hatred. It's important as Christians we show that friendship and love, particularly at this time, that can make all the difference and bring reassurance and comfort to our Jewish friends. I want to thank you for watching today's Middle East Report.